Good morning, everybody. 5 minutes with Sean, maybe 10. Always a good time when we have wonderful guests on the show, especially when we start talking about things that can become expensive, full of red tape and headaches. We go turn our attention to none better than the expert himself, Tom Kline. Tom, how are you, man?
Good morning to everybody. I'm doing great, Sean. Thanks for having me again. I always love being on here.
Oh, we love it as well. And I appreciate you coming on for this holiday show, right? The Memorial Day show. Hopefully everyone's enjoying their holiday, getting into things. But you're going to want to take 15, 20 minutes to listen to what we're talking about here. So, Tom, why don't you give viewers a little background on what we're trying to get accomplished here by the FTC, what their rules are, what the regulation is with regard to this end-to-end encryption? Sure.
So, starting back in May of 2003, the government passed the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, named after the sponsors, the representatives. I think they were senators, actually, sponsors. And the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act is to safeguard customer information is the purpose of the act. And in October of 2021, the Federal Trade Commission updated the regulations. Originally, the regulations were supposed to go into effect December 9th. They extended them to June 9th, which is just in a couple weeks here. And so dealers are required, there's a whole list of requirements. And Sean, unfortunately, the list of requirements is kind of wide and deep. And so if you'd like me to, I'll just kind of jump into what those are, or if you have specific questions, we can start there.
No, let's go with, I was going to say, is there a place also, Tom, post show, is there a place to be able to put a link into our show on LinkedIn, to put a link to where they could find these resources? Is that exist, I guess, just to start with? Is there a place dealers can go to find the entire list, assuming you and I don't cover the whole thing here in our 25 minutes?
Right. Well, I mean, the FTC websites, the ftc.gov, and I know the NADA has some good information on it also. So I would say those two websites would probably be the primary. Okay. I also, on my YouTube channel, I also have an hour-long YouTube where I go through the whole thing. So it's a Better Vantage Point on the YouTube channel. So that's awesome. So there's an hour video you can go through, and it kind of takes you on a roadmap step by step of all the steps you need to take.
Well, then make sure you link that into the show as well, on the comments the day it goes live. Put that in there, let people see that, let people know about it. We found out about it because we had a client bring us on to an NADA webinar here recently, about an hour and 10 minutes, put on by, I forget the gentleman's name, very smart, sharp gentleman, great presentation. For those of you who like to sit through that sort of thing, for me, I could not do it. It's not my bag. I'm just, because I get fired up. I think I've already told you this, but I get fired up that this is in somehow responsibility of a dealer when a dealer doesn't send leads, right? A dealer engages leads. However, upon my research, it does seem to be that the dealer concern is that of the salesperson on this bad boy right here. Using unsecured apps, using their kind of wide open communication skills, which before I even knew about the FTC, it's been a concern of mine because of understanding and controlling my brand, right? Once my salesman takes his conversation to here, I no longer have transparency into it. It's the reason we spend thousands of dollars for a CRM. So Tom, why don't we start with what you feel is the most important part? If we discuss nothing else today about this, what do dealers need to know about this today? What is the most important thing they need to know?
Gosh, the one thing I'd say, this is a complex law, which is hard to comply with. I would say the most important thing, and I'm going to break it down into 3 parts, that you document and report your efforts so that if someone comes in and the FTC comes in and says, hey, I want to see what you're doing here, that you can show them what you're doing. And evaluate and revise is the second thing. So you have to evaluate all your systems, and we're going to get into the nitty gritty here. And then finally, remediate and correct. So any issues that you find, that you're doing your best to correct them. Now, you can't control, as a dealer, you can't control the whole world, but the FTC says the responsibility is, and the onus is on the dealers. And to the extent that you can, you should document what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how you're trying to comply. The regulatory environment is such that if you can document and show you're trying to comply, generally the regulators may slap you on the hand, they may fine you, in the $4,000 area, but willful violations for this law are $50,120 per violation. And the FTC has left very loose what a violation means. So if you have a data breach and you have 20 people whose names, are compromised, then it's 20 times 50,120. So that's $1 million. If it's more than that, it's more than that. So if you can show where you are trying to comply and you're doing your best efforts, then I think that's really the difference.
And I think that that's something you've always talked about. I think you've always talked about having a plan documented so that at the very least you have that sort of, built up equity with any of these people, that when they come in, they're like, well, what are you doing? You're like, well, look at my book of, rules that we have on paper, and all the things that we attempt to follow will help us with that. So the FTC putting the onus on the dealer, as I've said, a bit frustrating there, an incoming use of the data. However, I do understand the salesperson side. Salesperson takes a picture of your license to upload it to the CRM, but it stays on their phone. Right now, we're right then and there. We are guilty. And the FTC, are they like the IRS, Tom? Do they even have enough agents to inspect this concept? Is this based in fear, to the best of your opinion? I mean, do we think that on June the 10th, all of a sudden the agents are going to start knocking at dealers' front doors? What is your honest opinion? I know you don't have the facts of it, but what is your opinion of how this will roll out, considering they've already kicked it down the can, or kicked the can down the road once? Do you believe June 9th? Do you believe then thereafter that the regulatory hits will start coming like they did many years ago with the texting thing, right? You and I talked about that the last time. So what is your belief as to what happens kind of June 9th and forward?
So first, an anecdote. I met a dealer who said there was a panel that the NADA put together to interface with the FTC on this issue. I was not aware of that panel, but this particular dealer said that he learned during that time that the FTC was hiring close to 1,000 agents to enforce this. Now, I don't know that seems too big to me. That seems way too big. But let's cut it down to 10% and say there's 100. Well, I think that typically the way the FTC works and regulatory bodies is they're not going to necessarily come in to audit on this issue. They do audits, but I would find it difficult that on June the 10th they're going to send out their SWAT team and start going into dealers. It could happen. Obviously, I don't know, but generally regulators start 80% of the time, 80% of the regulatory problems. If you look at the past history over the last 18 months as an example, it always starts with either customer complaints or employee complaints. And when they get enough complaints and they get enough body, that's when they start to go out and say, okay, what's going on at this business? You're upsetting customers. Their mission is to make sure that customers don't get taken advantage of. And so 80% of the time, I'm going to tell you it starts with upset customers. And I can tell you some examples of that and some regulatory actions they took. So I think that it's going to start with customers who are upset over one issue or another. Maybe it was a data breach. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just that they were upset. Then they come in, they're going to say, while we're here, we want to see all your GLBA safeguards and show us all your policies and your procedures and start to get into it that way.
Yeah, that does not sound fun for anybody involved. I think you're right, though. I think you've always said your problems start two-legged, right? And so
Right.
when that happens, people get pissed off, they bring attention to your business, and your business becomes investigated for one reason or another. And I think that's where it is. I think that what we have to do is, like you said, we've got to document, we've got to make people aware, though, right? So if our salespeople could be one of our linchpins, one of our problem spots, there needs to be continually, training or understanding of it. And I know it's boring, but ask our shops. They have to deal with the OSHA shit all the time. So rarely does our front end have to deal with anything. But this now, because of technology, is now a service problem, right, Tom? Because,
Absolutely.
services using iPads, they're taking pictures of things that those devices in no way secure encryption. They're going into the CRM, but do they stay on the device? Are they stored? How do we deal with that? Then you put BDCs in the mix. BDC trying to use video concept, trying to engage this way. This causes problems. But there are places to find the resources. There are places to fix this. So is for you, dealer step number one is obviously, as you said, it's document and report. Are you talking about dealers self-reporting their problems to the FTC? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying at first you need to document it. So it's typically not going to be the dealer who does this work, right? It's going to be a controller or a CFO or a GM. They need to document and report it to the dealer because it's ultimately the dealer's assets that are at risk and it's his responsibility. So I'm talking about internal documentation.
Yeah, but
And
somebody needs to have the plan there, right? You say whose responsibility it's not, but that doesn't make it clear whose it is. And I think in our dealerships, we do a lot of this, right? When that isn't clear. So dealerships document your plan of attack, right? That's what you mean. Document your tree of trust, if you will, and how it will go down. And then your comptroller or whomever you decide is responsible for this part of the deal should be reporting anything they find to the dealer themselves. So it is a self-internal report document situation.
Right. You have to, according to this and according to the law, you have to designate an individual at the dealership who is in charge of this specific program. That's part of it.
Okay.
So it's hard in 15, 20 minutes to get into the 50 or 60 items here, but that's part of that process, number one. Number two, you mentioned cell phones, and cell phones are so important in this for two different separate reasons. Number one, there are now tools for employees to be able to encrypt that data on their cell phone. So that technology does exist now.
App-based technology. So using like a WhatsApp, right, is typically encrypted. Like is that what you mean? Like there are apps available to do that, or are there add-ons throughout the CRMs? When you say that, what are you highlighting exactly?
I have knowledge of one specific company who has a program and a protocol that was designed to make sure that the data is encrypted both at rest and in transit. So because that's the standard is the data has to, while it's sitting in the CRM as an example, it has to be encrypted. Or if it goes between the website and the CRM, it has to be encrypted. Or if it's on someone's cell phone and they're trying to send it either to the sales manager or send it wherever they're going to send it, it has to be encrypted. If it's there, but the technology now exists that the salesman can take a picture of a STIP or a driver's license, and essentially it disappears from their device, so it doesn't reside there anymore. So that's one way to handle that problem.
Got it. All right. Totally makes sense to me. Cell phones, having the apps, finding the technology. But I do remember in my notes, they're saying basically like, look, that's great. You're doing all of that. But if the consumer isn't involved in encryption, but you are, there can still be a problem. It seems like there's a ton of gray area here to stay away from, but it seems unavoidable. So let's go back to point 2, evaluate and revise. We're evaluating what we documented, right? That's what we're talking about. And revise. When we talk about revision, do you find these to be small, subtle revisions, or like, holy cow, we missed the boat on a particular piece that we didn't see coming? Like, what do you anticipate being a part of that revise step?
Yeah, so you're required, as an example, to do a security risk assessment and on your information security program. So you're required to say what vulnerabilities you have, and you have to document this. And there are several good apps, software as a solution, that will help dealers and guide them kind of through this process. But you're supposed to be able to tell what's reasonably foreseeable internal and external security risks. So as an example, we talk about documenting, and there are many things you have to document here, but you have to document your security risks and then what you think you should do about them. You have to have change, and I'm just pulling some examples here. You have to have change management protocol. So if the person who is running the program gets fired or leaves or whatever happens, somebody else can sit down at that chair, look at the documentation, and still run the program. You have to have a data retention policy, as an example, which is a colleague of mine says data can, sometimes unused data is like toxic waste. If you're not using it, it's really a liability for your dealership now. So what is your data retention policy? For example, if you're using ADP or Ray or whatever it is, after 7 years or 8 years, depending on the data, or 4 years, the data should be purged, and you have to have a policy about that and have it in writing. That's a few of the things that you have to have in writing and be able to audit it, look at it, and of course is your system vulnerable? Let me just throw that in there before you ask the next question, Sean. So what vulnerabilities do you have from a structural computer standpoint? Can somebody easily go in through the back door and hack your system, get access to your data?
So then, obviously, like I said, it becomes kind of a two-way street, as my boy Bill Schomburg says, is that obviously CRM companies have a part in this, because a lot of what dealerships do is in there. A lot of it does feel secure. Okay, I'm not a tech guy to that extent. I don't know for sure, Tom, but it feels secure. However, I think I told you this in the pre-show. Big vendors right now in our space are pretty quiet on this front. And I've made it my responsibility from a couple of weeks ago to start asking these vendors, because it is what I've done. I mean, it's my life, so I figure why not? And the responses have been vague. They've been lawyer driven. Like, those are my favorite, when I just get like a PDF from a lawyer that just says, we are following everything. And it's like, but how and where and when? And it's like, but we are following everything. And it all feels like a bunch of, cover your own ass situation stuff. Okay. There's nothing about anything I've seen that doesn't feel that way. So dealers, you have to be looking and holding those people accountable as well. I know that the onus falls on you because you're the one people recognize, but you need to be putting equal amount of heat on every single vendor that you have to find out what their plan is. And if they don't have a plan, consider canceling them until they get a plan, because they are not going to pay your fine.
Well,
not now.
I have to take that another step further, and you're totally right, Sean, but the FTC says that you're required to get your vendors to sign documentation showing where the data is encrypted, both at rest and in transit, number one. Number two, the FTC also says that if that vendor is not going to comply, that you are going to be required to change vendors. Now that sets up that is part of the law. And in data, when you think, we'll take two different extremes on this. Your OEM, you're sending data back and forth when you already are a car. You're sending data back and forth when you're doing warranty claims. You're constantly sending data back and forth. Constantly. So if your OEM is not encrypting the data, according to the FTC, you're required to change. Now, we all know that's not going to happen. And in the case of an OEM, what you should do is once a month, you should task someone to call the OEM, find out what they're doing on that and document it, because that's beyond your control. But what is within your control is your ability to tell a story to the FTC to say, hey, look, I can't change vendors. I can't change from being a Nissan dealer or a Chevrolet dealer. But here's documentation where every month we call and try to push as much as we can and find out what they're doing. So that's kind of, the OEM is one extreme. The other extreme, you mentioned the CRM companies. If, according to the regulations, if your CRM company is not encrypting the data at rest and in transit, then you're required to change. Now, of course, if there's nobody in the industry doing it, you should find out, you should call 4 or 5, you should document that you tried to call, that none of them are doing it. And as a result of that, you've done all that you can do, right? If you can't find somebody who's encrypting the data, then you can't do that. And I've had some of these vendors call me in the last 12 months and say, now, what is it about this new law? What do I need to know? And so there are so many vendors in our industry who are behind and who don't have command of this information yet.
And again, I hear you say all this, and it only frustrates me further that the FTC would choose to put the onus and the reliance of this on the people who have literally the least amount to do with it in the entire structural place. Like if we put the OEM, as you mentioned, at the very top, and we put the dealer at the very bottom, everything in between is truly the problem. And
Right.
The dealer is the one who's got to document. The dealer is the one who's got to fix it. So dealers, there's nothing, am I bitching about ain't gonna help. So you got to do this for yourselves. You have to be involved. You have to document these things. Having a backup person seems like a simple thing to have, but have it documented, have it written. I go into this and I keep getting frustrated by this idea that something someone else did, right, can affect my business, can be my problem. But it sounds to be true here. It sounds
Right.
to be what we're looking at. So
well, let's go back to the just real quick, Sean. Let's go back to the origin of why dealers have to do this. It's because of the volume and the sensitivity of the data they collect. Right? You get their social, you get their date of birth, you get their pay stubs, you get their cell phone bills. I mean, you have their entire.
And we're doing it all digitally. I mean, you're getting credit apps from your website. You're having things faxed to you. I help friends buy cars all the time. My phone is full of people's shit.
Right.
I'm a hoarder of data. I don't get rid of it.
That's right.
But
that's why, and that's really why. I mean, so you're right. It is very frustrating for our dealers to have to go through this. As you know, I was a dealer for 30 years, and this would, when they designated car dealers as a financial institution, then all this, there are lots of regulations rolled out to car dealers.
Right. Which is interesting. Right. We were a middleman at best. Right. It's not, I mean, the majority, right? There are that 1% that run their own finance in-house and have all of that, but that's still, even most times, is put through a bank. It isn't like people are sitting there, Donald ducking this deal on their own. Like you're not able to do that. Tom, putting on your dealer hat for a minute here.
Sure.
How are you approaching this from internally, when you talk about changing systems, you talk about changing people. Is this just, if you were a dealer, are you just documenting the hell out of every single thing you can to put yourself in that position of safety? I mean, if you were a dealer, what's one of the things you would do based on what you've read and understood about this to that we maybe haven't touched on, to try and safeguard yourself even further? How can you take this a step further to do even more protection, I guess, is my question.
Sure. And I'm gonna break that question into two pieces. The first, I'm gonna tell and I see a lot of dealers, Sean, who, believe it or not, don't have any cyber insurance coverage in case of a breach. So there's a class action, as an example, going on against Coons Automotive in Northern Virginia for the data breach that happened there, and they're in the middle of litigating that, as I understand it. But I would tell dealers, in order to ameliorate your risk and make sure that if you do have a data breach, that you have plenty of cyber insurance coverage. And let me tell you just real quickly what I mean by plenty. Let's say that you have 100,000 names in your CRM and your DMS, which is very low for most of the dealers I see.
Agreed.
Okay, so if you have a data breach of 100,000 names, and let's just say you have to buy credit reporting for those 100,000 names, credit monitoring, it's about $100 a year. So 100,000 times $100 a year is $10 million. So if the dealer doesn't have enough cyber insurance coverage to cover that, they're self-insuring that, meaning if they have a breach, that's going to come out of their pocket. So one of the things that I would do is make sure that you had a robust cyber policy, which includes, very importantly, as you brought up early in the broadcast, it includes employee cell phone coverage. Some cyber insurance companies don't have employee cell phone coverage, and if they can prove the data breach started on an employee's cell phone, the whole claim is excluded.
I mean, they're an insurance company, dude, right? I mean, they're in the business of being a protector until it's time to protect. Then it's about finding ways to get out of being a protector and just being a guy you pay seamlessly every month. I did not know cyber insurance existed. So that is number one. I would put at the top of all of your list that if you were going to do this, or if you weren't going to do this and you weren't going to care, then go buy tons of insurance. And I guess then you can care once you get hit in the mouth with a $10 million insurance claim and then the headaches that follow that. That doesn't sound like any fun either, but you could do it. What's the second part?
And also just, fines from regulatory bodies are typically excluded from insurance policies also. There are ways to cover it, but that would be a whole different broadcast.
Oh my God.
And
my head is spinning with that concept. The idea that I could, but I could not be.
Right.
Where do I go next?
Yeah. So, and of course, ransomware, and there's tons of items you have to pay attention to under the cyber policy world to make sure you have the proper ransomware and defense costs and all that. But the other side of it is, like, as we've been talking about, making sure that you're documenting your efforts on all of these items so that you have a story to tell. It's just like when you sit down with a regulator, it's just like selling a car. You got to be able to sit down and say, hey, look, I'm sorry, we're not perfect. We upset Mrs. Jones. We had a data breach because of whatever it was. This is not because we're not trying. Let me tell you what we do to try to mitigate our risk here at ABC Motors. And you have to be able to sit down and do that. And it has to be real, Sean. It can't just all be stuff you make up. You have to have tried to spend money on your IT infrastructure. And if you're not gonna use one of those software vendors that I talked about earlier to help you with this specific thing, what did you do? Did you hire a consultant? How did you try to comply with this law? Even knowing that the CRM is messed up, even knowing that the DMS may or may not be encrypted, we tried, right? We tried, we made a mistake, but here it is. Here's what we did, and we tried.
Tom, when you talked about earlier, you talked about a risk assessment requirement as a part of this, I believe is how I understood that.
Correct.
Is that something people would come to you for?
Yes, I do that. But so software can handle about 40% of compliance in this law. There's 60% that's just pure old fashioned shoe leather. You just got to do the work. For example, you have to have multi-factor authentication. That's got to get installed. That's got nothing to do with this. The software that's out there will give the dealers templates to fill in, so they can say, here's my information security program. You fill out questionnaires, you send it in to the software vendor, and then they give you your information security program. But then you've got to make sure you're doing what it says, monitoring your systems, making sure you're not having data breaches, testing the effectiveness of your systems, that kind of thing. So you can do all this manually, 100%. if you choose to, but for, you know, a nominal amount per month, you can have the software, and then the rest of it, you have to take on the efforts you have to take on your own.
Wow, man. Look, this is a lot. This is clearly a lot. As you talked about, there are resources. You have an hour out there. NADA has an hour out there on it, or an hour plus. And you've been gracious with your time. So I want to get this wrapped up for you. I do appreciate it. As we walk our way out of this discussion, and you are to, you know, leave dealers with one thing, what's Tom's voice of reason or thought of what's most important? I know we've talked about them all differently. We've talked about where to do it. We've talked about how to set it up. But again, I'm trying to get to dealers. Tom, how do we help the dealers who, you know, aren't up to date on this kind of stuff, right? Who might have a smaller dealership in you know, what we call here in Wisconsin, the sticks. You know, what can people do, man? I mean, how can they really get out ahead of this so that they're not having to worry about millions of dollars of fines in your world? And if that means helping you, now is the time, Tom Kline. Plug the Tom Kline deal. I want to know the best resource for people to help get this fixed and understand and ahead of it.
Sure. So part of the regulation says that you're supposed to comply appropriate to your size and complexity. That's a kind of the way I read it. It's kind of built in.
What's such gray area, Tom? What is with
right.
Why do we write these things so like hey, let's see how you feel today,
right.
and let's see if do you think you were close? I don't know. I'm not sure. Like this seems like it should be so black and white, you know, but like you say, when a regulator comes in, you could sit, have coffee, be like, look, man, I tried, right? Here's my story. And they go, well, you know, a lot of gray area in here, and we all kind of agree. And then we move on. It seems frustrating. All right. So size and appropriate to your size.
Right. So, I mean, if you're a single point dealer, and you have, and I have clients who are this way, they've got, you know, 40 to 50 employees, you have to have a program, but it doesn't have to be as robust as if you have 40 stores or 50 stores, sure. Right? But you and so there's some wiggle room in the language, but you can't just stick your head in the sand and say, I mean, you can. I would help you to make the right decision to just start. Spend 10 minutes on it a day. Spend 15 minutes on it a day until you have enough body there where you feel like you have a good story to be able to say, hey, not only are we complying, here's our program, here's our person, here's what we're doing. We work on this 10 minutes a day, half an hour a day, whatever it is, but don't just ignore it. If you ignore it, then you get what you get. As my son used to say when he was 6 or 7, you get what you get and don't throw a fit. Right.
It's true. That's true. No, I think that's the best takeaway for me is dealers don't ignore this. All right. Yes, it's bullshit. Yes, it shouldn't have to do with you. Yes. All these things. Yes, you're probably not a financial institution. Yes. But you are now. You've been made this. Now it is up to us to try and make this better for ourselves. And then simply documenting. And guys, don't think you can document this the moment they walk in. You're going to need to have it documented, time-stamped, looked at. Go trust me when I tell you that if you protect yourself now, give yourself the effort, that it will go better for you than if you were completely ignorant and just not wanting to be a part of this. Tom Kline, dude, I don't know how you do this for a living. I've told you that before. I love you for it. I'm happy to have you as a resource for all of my clients. It is outstanding. Folks, if you need regulatory help, go find Tom Kline. He's on LinkedIn. Tom, is there anywhere else people can find you besides LinkedIn, which is where I find you?
Facebook, my website,
What's the website?
BetterVantagePoint.com, my YouTube channel. If you search Better Vantage Point, it'll come up, or search my name on YouTube and it'll come up. Happy to help. My shameless plug for the moment is I do help dealers with this. So I'll hold your hand and walk you through the whole thing. So if that's something interesting to you, I'm happy to get your call.
Man, that is what we're talking about there, right, folks? The resource, the people to call when we do this. When I read about it and my dealers flooded me with it, the first name that came to my mind was Tom Kline. So Tom, thank you so much for your time, man. Thank you for all of your help. And I get a sneaking suspicion you and I will be back talking about this as things begin to sort of, happen in the space. So thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Always good to see you, Sean. Thanks.
Thank you, dealers. As always, I've been messing up the schedule. I apologize. So next week, to kick off June, I'm going to bring you a new metric. I'm going to bring you a new acronym, which everyone loves. It's going to be fun. We're going to have fun with it. Enjoy your holiday, and we'll see you all again next week.